Welcome to Racing Green Live from Earthfest 2024. Today, our guest host, Caitlin Rozario, chats with Beccy Speight, Chief Executive of the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, otherwise known here in the UK as the RSPB. The conversation covers the crucial roles businesses, government, and individuals play in tackling biodiversity and the climate crisis, and the large-scale systemic changes needed to protect our planet for the long term.
I absolutely love that. So a lot of what's going on here at Earthfest today is about how businesses can make change. And we can see a lot of businesses tackling net zero and the climate crisis, but nature really does seem to be slightly overlooked in this wider conversation. So what do businesses really need to know when it comes to looking at nature amongst these other big issues that we need to tackle?
Yeah, it is interesting. So I think the drive towards net zero and the use of carbon as a kind of single measure has really helped businesses get their heads around climate change and what they can do about it. And of course, nature is pretty complex, so there isn't that one single measure. And I think that has probably not helped businesses get their heads around what they need to do. But we all know now, right, that the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, what's happening to our natural world, absolutely go hand in hand. So they go hand in hand in terms of what's happening, because, our natural ecosystems underpin so much of what we do as a human species, right? So I think about 55% of the global economy is dependent on healthy natural resources. The water we drink, the food we eat, all of these need healthy natural ecosystems. So there's this growing realization that we can't just fix the climate crisis, because if nature goes to pot, we're stuffed. So we need to tackle both. And a lot of the solutions are joint solutions. So that's things like, natural capital and fixing things like peatlands, getting those restored, making sure that we're able to kind of tackle some of the flood risks that we're seeing from climate change, for example. So it's helping, nature can basically help us adapt to the climate change that's already, we've seen this winter here, this long, wet, cold winter, that is climate change. So I think people are realizing the two go hand in hand. Businesses are absolutely waking up to that. And there are things now like this voluntary TNFD, kind of declaration of measuring your risks. But I think really smart businesses are just saying, okay, we need to think long term. I think businesses are often better than governments at thinking long term. And they're saying, what are those big risks that we can see ahead of us? And they often are climate related, nature related, and having established those risks, what can we do to tackle them? So I think really smart businesses are starting to do that, but it's definitely running behind the focus on climate because it is more complex.
And so of those kind of smart businesses, what have you seen? What are some good things that you've seen businesses doing?
Yeah, so I would say there are some really good early adopters of TNFD, and that's kind of basically starting to measure your impact on the natural world. And so it's great to see those. I think some of the more creative things I'm seeing happening is quite interesting. So people putting somebody on their board who is, has that kind of nature representation. We were talking earlier to Elemis, who's starting to do that, absolutely. And we've been kind of talking to kind of Faith in Nature, who've got a director for nature, on their board. So that's really interesting. And then I think also one of the things we were talking about this morning was this sort of, workforce for nature idea. So this idea that employees and consumers are starting to really care about this stuff and almost driving businesses to do more. And I think, again, smart businesses are seeing that and responding to it and starting to put actions in place that are demonstrating that they are doing something to tackle what's happening to the natural world.
I think it's interesting as well, because you were saying how the climate crisis and nature are linked, but then on the other side as well, we can see that like employee well-being is so linked to nature. And we've started to see definitely, I've seen anyway, like a real uptick in things like that are coming from other cultures, like forest bathing and really getting out in nature as a way to reclaim a bit of peace, which I think is so important. So are you seeing anything in that respect? Like, are you seeing a bit of a shift towards that culture and kind of climate and nature piece?
Yeah, I think, there are two sides of that coin. So one side of that coin is eco-anxiety. So people feeling so overwhelmed by what's going on, that they become really, really anxious about it. We have to look at that in our own organisation. We employ a lot of people who are absolutely passionate about the natural world, and every day they're looking at some really depressing stats about what's going on in terms of decline. So we have to really tackle that. But I do think that one of the ways in which you can tackle that best is by feeling that you are doing something, that it's making a difference. And also getting out into nature. So I find myself, I don't know about you, Caitlin, but I find myself, if I'm having a really stressful day, if I just get out into the natural world, even if it's just for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, listen to the bird song. I do quite a lot of, it's drier than this, lying on my kind of lawn. I'm lucky enough to have a garden and just kind of feeling the earth beneath me. I think that really has huge kind of benefits for kind of mental well-being, as well as obviously all the health benefits of exercise and so on. So I think people are absolutely waking up to that. And certainly if you do surveys of the population at large and ask them about nature, do they care about it? Why do they care about it? That sort of sense of connection and well-being comes back really strongly, and I think is increasing that recognition.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely feel like the days where I don't start with a walk, I'm really lucky to have some really lovely green space near me, and there's a woodpecker.
Yay.
So that's really... never seen it. I hear it all the time. It's very exciting, but as hard as I try, I can never find it. But I completely agree. If I don't have that, I definitely feel a bit off kilter for the rest of the day. So I think it's really important. And I know in my team, we're in the middle of the city, but we take a lot of walking meetings to just get outside, have a little bit of a break from the kind of, the four walls and everything. So I think I'm definitely seeing more of it. I think, though, part of the problem is there is so much for businesses to focus on. We're in a really difficult moment kind of across the board. So how can businesses juggle having a bit more focus on nature with all the other priorities, with sustainability and kind of everything else that's going on?
Yeah. So I think I can imagine that is really challenging, actually. And when I think about RSPB and all the things we're trying to do all the time, it is really challenging juggling all of those aims. But I think the real answer is to see them as interconnected and take the actions that are going to deliver across more than one of those agendas. So, for example, we're working with quite a few businesses at the moment on restoring peatland. So, peatland is a really important source of carbon. When it's in a healthy state, it still sequesters carbon. It can absorb it from the atmosphere. And it also delivers a huge kind of ecosystem service in terms of filtering water, making sure that the water that goes into our water system is cleaner than it would be otherwise. And it's a great habitat for nature as well. But so much of our peatland, and it's important in the UK because there isn't that much peatland in the world, but we have quite a bit of it here in the UK, but so much of it is in a poor state. So it's been eroded over time, it's kind of been, drained because we wanted to perhaps farm it, so it's got really dry and therefore it kind of disappears into the atmosphere. A lot of it is in poor condition. And restoring it delivers not only for the carbon agenda, so for climate, but it also delivers in terms of the nature agenda, and it also delivers in terms of kind of being part of fantastic, beautiful landscapes that people can then appreciate and enjoy. So it's kind of got a win-win-win-win-win, So I think finding those nature-positive solutions that deliver across more than one agenda is a really good way forward. But you have to be able to, as a business, kind of join stuff up and think across. We're quite we're naturally siloed, aren't we?
Yeah.
I mean, I see it happening in RSPB. I think, oh God, why can't we just join that bit to chat? And I think we've got to get out of those silos, think holistically, because the issues we're facing now in terms of things like climate change and the biodiversity crisis are huge. So the only way we can tackle them is by joining up within our own organisations and then joining with other organisations as well. And that's really powerful.
Yes, I think sometimes it's really important to take a step back to be able to see the bigger picture, because there are so many things to deal with and everyone feels 100% the most important thing. So when you're saying, for example, let's take the peat example, is if a business were to get involved in that, is that through donations? Is it through giving it the kind of platform through their socials? Is it through volunteering? Like, what do you think is the most impactful thing at the moment?
Yeah, all of the above.
Right.
So absolutely, doing things like peatland restoration, you're often working at scale, you're often working in quite remote places. So, for example, the Flow Country up in Scotland, so you've got to kind of get kit there, you've got to be able to get people there. So it's not a cheap thing to do, but it's absolutely a bargain when you look at what it delivers in terms of kind of carbon sequestration and also, the kind of other ecosystem services I was talking about. But it's not cheap to do. So absolutely businesses can help fund it. But then I think the really meaningful partnerships are where people and businesses get really engaged with what's happening. So I went for a great walk recently at Dovestone in the Peak District with the CEO of the Co-op, for example, looking at how they're helping us do restoration there in the Peak District. And that was brilliant. She brought a whole team out there. They got really excited about bog and understanding how that works. And they're now thinking about kind of how that influences some of their other thinking. I think, talking to Elemis this morning and talking about how we can kind of look at how they were a really interesting business because they were sort of saying to us, how do you capture a complex story like peatland restoration in really simple terms so that we can use that and get that out to people? And I think that's something that we can learn from that kind of interaction with business. So I think that the really deep, meaningful partnerships are the ones that get fully engaged. It's lovely to have the money. That's fantastic. And I'm so grateful to every partner who's helping us do that. But the big stuff happens when you've got people volunteering from the business, you've got kind of going out to consumers. That's when the really important change happens.
Yeah, I guess there's a network effect kind of at play there as well, because if someone has that in their own company and they go move somewhere else, they might bring it with them, and it just kind of goes on and on. I love that. I love the idea of like getting people really involved in it, because I think especially around here, I work in the city, like it feels far away, right? The problems feel you can see the impacts of pollution, things like that, but you don't think about bogs up in Scotland. It's just not that front of mind. So having that kind of immersion into it, I think I can really see how that would make people feel a lot more connected to an issue and want to do more about it.
Yeah, but I get that, and I hear what you're saying. I'm not arguing against it, but we do something called Big Garden Birdwatch every year. Every January. I mean, we just had the results in from this year's, and over 500,000 people took part. And that's not just about kind of people, out in the countryside. That's people everywhere just looking. One of the great things about birds is they're literally on the other side of the glass. I mean, I came through Coldrop Yard this morning walking here, and there was a little blue tit in one of those trees. I did think, oh, that's not great, mate. You need to find somewhere with a few more trees. But he was surviving there. And I think, so birds are literally just there, and yet they are really wild and they are really other. And I think kind of people absolutely love that. And so just getting to know the nature that's just immediately in front of you can be a great way of kind of connecting into the natural world and then understanding all that big ecosystem stuff beyond that, so it's a great way in, really. And definitely those levels of participation are not dropping for us. People are really interested.
That's really lovely to hear. I live in South London, and there's a family of blue tits who live at the bus stop. And I've literally got a text to a friend recently being like, who lives locally, being like, have you seen the blue tit family? Like, it's kind of like, they're so magical looking. Yeah. They're so beautiful, and then they're just like in this like urban jungle. Yeah, I can definitely see how there is something kind of magical. You said birds are kind of other. There is something kind of magical about them. Like we found a robin's nest in our garden recently, but in our pegs bag.
Yes.
And like you see it, and you're like, oh my goodness. So yeah, I can really see how people can get involved in that sense. Right, we're doing great for time. So I'd love to hear about Save Our Wild Isles.
Yeah.
So can you tell us about your work on that and maybe your biggest learning that you've had so far?
So many. So this started off about kind of 4 years ago as a production company came to us and said, we want to do a series for the BBC about UK wildlife, so the wildlife that's here in the UK. And we were like, whoa, that sounds really exciting. And so we ended up as co-producers for this series alongside WWF and also the Open University. And it's, I don't know if you saw it, but it came out last year. It was an absolutely beautiful series. And it was kind of anchored by David Attenborough. Yeah. So David Attenborough. bow down. And also, it just had fantastic footage. So it takes about 4 years to do the filming for something like this. They go everywhere. You know, I was talking to one of the guys who said he had to go 50 times to one really remote kind of bit of river to film the salmon leaping, you know, to get the right shots of the salmon leaping. So it was an amazing series. It was watched by about 12 million people. I think it was the most watched nature series the BBC's had for the last 5 years. So that's brilliant and that's lovely, but what happens on the back of that, I suppose, is the big question we were asking ourselves. So we then, with WWF and then the National Trust as well, we ran a campaign which is still going on called Save Our Wild Isles. And that was about saying, okay, so what are we going to do about it? So we've done all sorts of things. We produced some great films, just sort of really short films aimed at business sectors that said, you know, in the finance sector, what could this look like? In the food and farming sector, what could this look like? You know, and they're fantastic. And you know, we've had more than 300 businesses already sign up to sort of use those internally. But we also did a whole heap of other stuff. We worked with local community groups to do stuff in their own immediate communities and help fund that. We worked with Aviva on that. And the thing we're just about to launch this May is called Nature's Workforce. And that's all about a toolkit that employees can use in their businesses to kind of help create that kind of employee movement, really. I call them sleeper agents for nature. But, you know, this idea that, you know, in a business, you can start that movement and you can start driving that change through your business. Because, I mean, what's interesting is that one of the questions I always get asked is, I've decided I really care about the climate and nature. Do I need to go and work for the RSPB? No, you don't. You know, in your working life, wherever you are, whatever you are doing, you can make a difference. And that's the powerful thing, really, rather than everybody becoming conservationists or sustainability professionals. But so Save Our Wild Isles has been really powerful, I think, in terms of taking what was this amazing kind of visual spectacle of our nature and saying, but it's fragile. What can we do about it? You know, and that's the big issue of today, really, is, you know, we have got still fantastic nature all around us, but it is declining overall. There are some good news stories for particular species, but generally overall it's declining. The big drivers are climate change, are the changes in our agricultural practices over the last 50 years. You know, pollution is another big driver. But we know what we've got to do. We know how to fix this. But the issue is now we've got to do it at scale, and we've got to do it really urgently. And for me, that's where business has a real part to play, because business understands those two things. Understands scale, understands urgency, understands big long-term strategic risks. Almost more than government does, I think, you know, because government's often on this much shorter-term cycle, very politically driven. Businesses absolutely get that. So I get quite excited when we're working with businesses on it.
And I'm seeing quite a clear link, obviously, between the kind of direct-to-consumer footage and the visuals, and then you've obviously got these actions that you're talking about. So are you seeing kind of business actions being driven by consumer opinion now? Is that becoming more of a thing?
I think it's growing. So I think it's two things. I think it's consumers, you know, so we have run something called Fair to Nature, which is a kind of certification scheme for food, basically, that says this food was produced in a way that, you know, was fair to nature, and there are standards around that in terms of how it was farmed, for example. And we definitely, when we go out and we survey people now, more than half of people are saying, that's what I want. I want to know that's the case. So I think, you know, that kind of understanding is growing. But I think what's really interesting as well is that as younger generations are coming through into employment, I would say more of them are really concerned about climate, about nature, and, you know, want to feel that they're working for a business that is doing something about this. So I think it's a kind of pincer movement, really. You've got consumers on the one hand, you've got employees on the other, and I think that's a really powerful shift that's going on.
So where do you start as a business?
Yeah.
So we'll go to individuals in a second, but as a business, like if we could do, so I'm just like, this is, I think, how many people are in kind of decision-making roles here? Is there anyone who can like go and do stuff? Okay, I've seen a few hands. Okay, amazing. So these people who are in decision-making roles who can go and have some impact on like business policy, what thing would you be like, this is a really great thing for you to try and like push right now that you can really get stuck into?
So I think I would always say start by understanding the risks. So, you know, think think risk, because businesses understand that language and understand what they're doing. And I think economic risks as well, because the bottom line is what matters a lot in business. And I think once you start investigating that, you can see how dependent your business is on healthy natural ecosystems, a functioning natural world. And you can start to spot some of those risks. And they might not be here right now, but you can see them coming down the tracks. And so I think that's a good place to start if you're kind of having a strategic level conversation. I think, the other thing is, I think, the sort of Nature's Workforce toolkit that we produced through Save Our Wild Isles is a great way to get employees engaged and thinking about it. And then the other thing I would say is to really look at some of those kind of voluntary mechanisms like TNFD and really say, can we start adopting some of this and start monitoring our own impact? And that then leads to action, because it's quite shocking once you start monitoring the impact, you can really see what's going on, and that can then drive action. And that, I don't think that will be voluntary for long. I think that will become mandatory pretty soon. And that's going to make a huge difference as well. But I think almost the most important thing is just to start having the conversation, start talking to other leaders in your business or your board or just your kind of colleagues about what's going on in the natural world and about how your business fits into that, and the difference that you can make in terms of doing something about the risks you can see, but also doing something nature positive, making a difference in the positive direction. And there's lots that businesses can do.
And from an RSPB perspective, what can individuals be doing? So kind of separately to work, like at home, what can people be doing? What would you love to see people kind of cracking on with?
So I think it works on a number of levels. So if you're lucky enough to have a garden or be part of a community green space, right, you can really easily make that much better for nature. And that makes a big difference, because if you join up all of those spaces, that level of habitat provision for nature is really important. And it's really uncomplicated stuff like letting your lawn grow, no mow may, that's really important. Maybe putting in a pond. If you haven't got a pond, I did that a few years ago. It makes a huge difference in terms of the amount of biodiversity you'll get in that green space. Making sure that there is kind of lots of kind of wilder shrubbery around for birds, that will really attract birds. Making sure perhaps that there's plenty of food. Don't use chemicals, because that's kind of putting chemicals into the system that's bad for nature. There's lots of things you can do on a very local, immediate level. But then I have to say, because of the scale of the issue we're facing now, we need systemic change. And by that, I mean we need changes to our food system, we need changes to the way in which we kind of run our economies and so on. And that means that you have to use your voice. So you have to be prepared to kind of stand up and make your voice heard. We've got an election coming up later on this year. You need to be asking the candidates that turn up on your doorstep from whatever party, what are they doing around some of these big issues for nature? And that gets it on the agenda, and politicians listen to people. So I would say you've got to act at both those levels. By all means, act locally, do something in your immediate local space. That's fantastic. By all means, volunteer for a nature organisation or in your local community. Give some time, but also use your voice. Use your voice, because otherwise we're not going to get there.
So we've got some 3 really actionable things you can all go and do now. We're very lucky to have a garden, and I think there's all the things that you can do from an actionable standpoint, but then also it is really underpinned by a sense of how exciting it is. We have a badger, and the dog hates it, but it is thrilling whenever you see the badger. And I know that sounds silly, but sometimes you do need a little bit of a personal connection. Like we said about businesses, there's so much going on, and sometimes once you see the fruits of those things start to happen, you can see your impact that you're having even in a small way, which is so nice. A little bit deep. So you mentioned Sir David Attenborough, our Lord and Saviour. He said, "We now have a few short years during which we can still make a choice. Where just enough remains of the natural world for it to recover, this starts and ends with us." So with that, and with what you've said about eco-anxiety, we've talked about steps that we can take, but how hopeful do you feel that we can collectively make a difference, like a big sea change? And how do you personally stay optimistic in the face of all this kind of difficulty?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't be sitting here if I wasn't hopeful, because what would be the point?
True.
He's absolutely right. Now is the time because nature can't wait. So we've now got declines happening where we've got, I think the last State of Nature report, which is a sort of a coalition of lots of different organisations bringing all their data together. And we convened that at the RSPB. And the last one came out last autumn and said 1 in 6 species in the UK is at risk of extinction. So we're kind of really at that point now. So he's absolutely right about the urgency. And that's why, things like the Global Biodiversity Framework, which was set at Kunming, Montreal, the big kind of global CBD gathering last year, and said we've got to get 30% of land and seas restored and being managed well for nature by 2030. That's really soon, right? Yeah. And we have kind of, acts in the UK that have the same targets. So that sense of urgency is absolutely there. And I think what gives me hope is that I do think we know the solutions. So we do know how to fix things for species. We do know how to restore habitat at scale and join it up. We do know that we could farm in a way that produces food alongside a healthy natural ecosystem. We do know what we need to do about the state of our rivers, right, in terms of kind of sewage going in, agricultural runoff going in. We know what to do, but we've just got to do it now at scale, and we've got to do it with urgency. And I think that means that governments absolutely have to step into this space and play their part, because the individual cannot do it on their own. Yeah. And I have sometimes I kind of despair of kind of governments and politicians realizing this. But I think increasingly they are. The environment, it's always in the kind of top 3 or 4 issues for people. Yes, absolutely, the economy. Yes, absolutely, the health system. Yes, education, but also the environment, increasingly so. And so I think that will push politicians to act. And I think also, when you look at the impact of some of the risks we're seeing now in terms of climate change, flood risk, I think we're probably going to have a huge spike in food prices later this year because farmers aren't getting crops into the ground now because of the flooding. Politicians are going to have to act. So, that gives me hope as well. But the big issue is, will we do it soon enough? Will we do it soon enough for nature? And that's the big issue. But the other thing, that gives me a huge optimism is that when you do it, nature does come back pretty fast. So, when you do restore a habitat or you do rewild an area, nature comes back fast. It goes, you can almost hear it going, and it comes back fast. And I think, so, there is absolutely hope. And if you look at, birds like the bittern, for example, we've had over 200 booming bitterns. They make this lovely sound that sounds like blowing across the top of a milk bottle. That's because we've got more wetlands back now. Right. So, bitterns are doing really well. Cranes are back. Cranes disappeared from the UK 400 years ago. Cranes are back because we've got the right habitats for them. So, that's they're an amazing bird. They're the tallest bird in the UK. Incredible.
When did they get back?
Oh, they've been coming back for a few years now.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Whereabouts can you see a crane?
The best place I always go is kind of wetlands. So I would say RSPB Lake and Heath would be a great place to go, and you'd see cranes, and you'd also see chicks at this time as well. But they will absolutely come back if we do the right stuff. So I think, it's not too late, but we do have to act now. And I am optimistic that we are starting to do that.
Is there anywhere that so we've talked about companies, we've talked about individuals, and we've been talking briefly about how governments is slightly got these shorter timeframes and things. Are there any countries that you think are doing things well? I've just been in Costa Rica. And
That's always the example.
Yeah. I think, so I haven't fact-checked this, but one of the guides told me that 98% of their space is protected either by the government or by private owners who then pledge back to the country. Obviously, that's something that's, really difficult to do, but are there, whether it's Costa Rica or somewhere else, is there anywhere that you're like, that's something that we should really look at doing, that could really make a huge difference?
Yeah, so Costa Rica is always the great example that is used because they have done so much and they've absolutely kind of hooked their economy to it and everything. I think I also kind of look at countries, that are really kind of trying to do stuff at scale and link it into other issues like social issues, for example. We work quite a lot in Sierra Leone, where there's a big area of still standing rainforest, really important, holds a huge number of really important species. But, so much of that forest has disappeared from Sierra Leone because it's been about driving the economy, it's been about what people need in order to kind of make a living. But, there's some really kind of intelligent thinking going on now about how you can have a forest still standing but generate enough income so that people don't feel they have to log, illegal log or, kind of destroy some of that rainforest to create farmland. So I think it's that holistic, intelligent thinking that you see happening in some bits of some countries. And I also think, actually, here in the UK, we have set some really good legislative targets for nature. So we have said we want 30% by 2030. That's in the Environment Act. We've got an environment improvement plan. But the issue is, are we going to deliver on it? And that's where we, in an ENGO and people at large, have to hold our politicians to account. They've signed up to these targets. They can recognise at an intellectual level that this is a good thing to do. But when it comes down to actually delivering, that's where we've got to really hold them to account now.
So my next question was going to be, is there one message that you really want people to take away from today? But it feels like we're coming back to the kind of using your voice, especially right now. We've got elections coming up. Would you say that's the one thing you really want to reiterate, or is there something else that you really want to hammer home?
Yeah, I think I would say, first of all, it's now. So don't delay. Don't think I can do this next year, or I'll worry about sustainability in a few years' time when we sorted something out in the business. Got to do it now. And the second thing is, I think, do something local and do something for you. So that will help your own kind of mental health and well-being if that's a problem for you. And do it in your garden or whatever. Yeah. And then the third thing I would say is absolutely, because we need systemic change now, you have to step into that space. You have to be prepared to use your vote, use your voice. If marching is your thing, go on a march. But, just kind of make sure you are using your voice to drive that bigger systemic change as well, because without that, we will not succeed.
Got it? Yes. So I think I would be remiss if I let you go. We'll see if we have a few minutes for questions, but do you have a favourite bird? Are you allowed to say?
I always get asked this, and it does move around a bit, but my favourite bird is the gannet. So the gannets are these amazing kind of white seabirds with a kind of a yellow head and piercing blue eyes. And they are just built for what they do. If you see a gannet diving, boy, that's somebody. They dive. I think somebody said to me they dive way faster than Tom Daley dives. They are really good at it. And they're also a bird that you can so they're a really dramatic bird, but you can see them really up close. So if you go to somewhere like RSPB Bempton Cliffs on the east coast of Yorkshire, you can be within 5 feet of a gannet just getting on with its thing, nesting on the cliffs, having its chicks, and they're also a bird that's being really impacted by avian flu. So this is that disease that's kind of ripped through the world in the last few years. And because they only produce one chick often a year, it's really slow for them to recover from a huge disease impact like that, which is why we've got to do lots for our seabirds. But the thing that is that we think there are some signs of immunity developing in gannets. So there have been photographs of gannets that have a much dark, one eye much darker, and we think that might be linked to immunity to bird flu. So they're also a fighter and a survivor, and I think we need some of that spirit in the work we're doing to save nature. So the gannets are my favourite bird.
You've tied that up beautifully. Thank you. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions if anyone's got anything. Anyone want to ask Beccy anything about birds, about actions? Yeah. Oh, you've got a mic coming. I was going to repeat it for you, but you've got a mic. Go for it.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. How does the RSPB make sure that the knowledge that accumulates in the projects that you run here in the UK is shared around the world?
Oh, that's a good question. So we are part of something called BirdLife International, and that is an international network of organisations like us. I mean, we're by far the biggest, but there are 130 organisations in that network all around the world. And one of the things that we do as one of the bigger partners in that network is that we often work on a project with a smaller partner and really try and help them grow their capacity and grow their knowledge, as well as tackle the particular issue they're working on. And that seems to work really successfully. So we can often kind of deliver a project over a number of years, then pull back from it, and that partner is stronger and able to go on and hopefully at some point do that for another partner organisation somewhere. So that's really important. I mean, the other thing is, of course, we're producing lots of science papers from that science team I talked about, so they're sharing their knowledge a lot through those papers. There's a big issue about whether there's open access or not, but that's coming, and that science is getting out there. And then I would also say that that whole kind of people engagement piece is really important to us. So we do a lot of work around things like kind of big garden bird watch, working with schools, working with kind of young people to really try and grow that knowledge at that level as well. And I just think that's really important, because I think one of the issues we've got is that on the whole, people remain slightly blissfully ignorant of how desperate things are in the natural world. So we've got to be able to share that story and give them the hope and optimism that there's something they can do about it. So, good question.
Thank you. Anyone else got a question before we wrap up? I think you've just given so much information that everyone's digesting. I'm going to go and talk to some politicians. Thank you so much. I feel like we've packed a huge amount into 40 minutes. I really, really appreciate you being here today. Thank you so much. Can I get a round of applause for Beccy? Thank you.
Thank you for having me.